In this movie, I want to show how to create a custom repeat pattern design from scratch. I'll show you a systematic process anyone can pull off, so let's jump right into it. Now, the first one I want to show you is what I would call an object-based pattern, meaning these are free-floating, in this case, illustrative elements. They could be graphic elements if you wanted. But it all works off the principle of a bounding box. That's what this rectangular shape is here. And this is what is going to help us orient a pattern. All you have to keep in mind when you're using Illustrator to create repeat surface patterns is it's all based off of 90-degree angles. Now, in mathematics, I believe there's 14 type of tessellations. Those could include a 4-way pattern, a 5-way pattern, and those get pretty complex, but that's what's used in the textile industry. But Illustrator doesn't support all those different types of tessellations. Everything in Illustrator is based off of 90-degree angles, and they have a pattern tool I'm going to be showing you that allows you to create custom patterns for print. You can use it for all kinds of things. I'm going to show you one example in this movie specifically. Now, the reason why I'm starting with this is the easiest of all patterns to create, an object-oriented pattern. So you can see I have all of these kind of foliage type elements that I've illustrated here. Some of them are the same, like these two. I just flipped it. And I composed it within this framework, within this bounding box. Wherever elements go off on the top, they're going to have to come in on the bottom. That's how a pattern works, to create that seamless repeat over the surface it's applied to. That applies to all 4 sides. Top, wherever it goes off on the top, has to come in the bottom. Wherever it goes off the right, or the left in this case, comes in on the right. So if we go ahead and select these elements up here with the bounding box, I'm going to clone this, Command-C, Command-F. And I have Smart Guides turned on, which is Command-U. So if you hover over an anchor point or a path, it tells you. And I'm just going to drag this down because just to show you, if I snap it down here, you can see these elements don't overlap the other elements. They come into play here, and this is how you can test it as you're building it. You can move elements around, but this is ultimately how you can test it. In this case, vertically. If you wanted to test it horizontally from side to side, you could do the same things. Just select these elements, clone it. And when I say clone, I have a keyboard shortcut. I might do a video on setting up keyboard shortcuts because it makes the process in Illustrator go way faster. I have one which is a recorded action. It does Command-C, Command-F, and then bring to front. So whenever I select items like this, I can just hit F3. Then I can focus on this anchor point, drag it over, and I get a copy. I don't have to go up to a menu and pull down or do multiple key commands. It just makes the process go faster. But this is how you can test it as you're moving elements around. And if something looks too tight, you need to give it more space or rotate it, you can adjust it. This is the process you would use to create an object-oriented pattern. All you need to create the actual pattern is what's shown here within the framework of this bounding box, because the pattern tool will move these elements in on the opposing sides where they fit into a seamless pattern. Now, in this specific design, I have what I call free floaters. These are elements that are part of the pattern, but they never kind of transgress over the edge of the bounding box. So it never goes off the edge. It could if you wanted it to. In this case, it doesn't. I just use these to kind of fill in those gaps so it makes it look more kind of whole and complete. So once you have all these elements, we have everything needed right now to make a pattern. So all we're going to do is select everything, and we're just going to drag and drop it right into the swatches panel like that. Deselect, that's important. When I first started using this years ago, when they first came out with the pattern tool, I'd forget to deselect and it would apply the pattern to everything I had selected. So don't make that mistake. Deselect. We're going to dive into the pattern tool now. So I'm going to click into what we just did. And in the background, it shows you how the repeat looks by default. Well, that looks horrible. That's not what we want. We're going to go to the pattern tile tool right here. And if you want to name it, you can name, I usually name it afterwards, but we'll go and name this. I'll call this, I don't know. I didn't even think about a name for this. Let's just call it Tropics. Like that. That'll work. And we're going to click on the pattern tile tool. When I click this, it's going to highlight this bounding box that allows me to tell AI where I want the repeat edges to be. Right now, it's snapping to our bounding box here, which in general is okay. But what I'm going to do is pull this one out, and you can see it moves it further away. The reason why I bring this bounding box in to the pattern tool is because this is what I'll use to register it now. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this one down to the top of the bounding box till it snaps. And then I'm going to drag this one over to the edge of the bounding box until it snaps. Then I'll drag this one in and watch the faded copy of this pattern. As I drag it over and snap it, that'll come into play and register. We still need to do the bottom now. I'll bring that in, and you can see now it has that proper repeat going here. Obviously, we don't want the bounding box. That would just serve the purpose to register everything precisely. So now I can select that and delete it. And now you can see this repeat is working. Now you can dim this. Right now it's dimmed at 20. If you wanted to see what it looked like at 100%, of course, you could go into here and punch that in. And this gives you a preview. I just like knowing what my original art is, so I usually dim it to about 20 or so. And that's how that works. These overlaps, this is if your artwork overlaps, you can tell it from what side to what side. You want the left to overlap the right or the right to overlap the left. Same at top and bottom. That's what these do. In this case, this isn't that type of pattern, so I'm not using those controls. But we have everything needed now, so we can exit out of the pattern tool and put it to use. You can do that 3 different ways. You can double click on the background, and it'll take you to the artboard. You can click on this arrow in the top left, it'll take you to the artboard, or you can just hit escape, and that'll take you back to the artboard. And I think that one's the easiest. Let's go ahead and showcase how to put this to use now. So we have this box with this fill in it, and this is where the appearance panel is going to come in. So I'm going to drag the appearance panel out because this is what you'll use to compose your patterns, and you'll be able to do more immersive patterns as you're going to see coming up. So right now, this object just has one fill, no stroke. And what we're going to do is we're going to add another fill to this by going to the appearance option menu, click add fill. It'll duplicate whatever your last usage is, which is this kind of faded lime color. And we're going to select our pattern that we just created for the fill on this fill layer. And boom, there it is, sitting on top of the bottom color of this same object, which is this faded color. And that looks pretty cool. So that's all it takes. Now, once you have this, I can select this object, which has 2 fills in it, and I can drag and drop it into my graphic styles, and notice it creates a graphic style. Now I could double click this and change the name to organize it. You can see some other patterns in here, and I'll showcase those in a little bit. But I want to first walk through kind of a more complex pattern and how you can create it from scratch. So let's go ahead and jump into that. I'm going to go back to layers. And by the way, I took this pattern that I'm showing you here and I simplified it. We actually used it on a client's project. This is a distillery here in Oregon where I live. And we just simplified it down into a 1 color so it just faintly appears in the background of this label for their aged rum. So there's a lot of different ways you can use patterns. I've used them for branding projects. I've used them for gift wrap. So a lot of different possibilities to put pattern to use in the real world. So let's go ahead and walk through the entire kind of systematic process for creating a custom pattern. For me, it starts with drawing. And so this was my pretty crude thumbnail sketch. I wanted to do something kind of nebulous. Let's go ahead and turn off these layers. We don't need it. So I just drew it out. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm kind of keeping in mind the bounding box. It's going to be like a rectangle, kind of a long rectangle laying on its side. And here I'm rethinking how to shape some of this. So it always starts at a very crude stage like this, and then it's a progressive where I'll draw it out a little more tightly into a rough drawing. But my bounding box, I could tell, was kind of skewed. It wasn't perfect. So I usually draw it again. And I'm doing this on what's called a light pad. It's only about 3/8 of an inch thick, but it's like a light table. And I use vellum. I love drawing on vellum. Nina Paper makes it. It's actually a really great product. Been using it for years. So I redraw this and I refine it. So I go back in, I figure out, okay, I need more space here. I move elements around and I compose it. So I pretty much figured out how my repeat's going to go, but now I have to build it. And so that's where the vector part comes in. We're going to jump into that. But some of you might get hung up a little bit, and it seems like the younger crowd, because I'll usually comment at this stage and go, I'll scan in my refined sketch, and I've had people now go, what's a scanner? And I have to tell them what a flatbed scanner is, which kind of surprises me, but they're worth their weight in gold. Yes, you can use it to scan drawings in, so it's perfectly flat, doesn't distort it. You wouldn't want to use your cell phone because you might not have it at, a plumb angle, so it gets a perfect image of whatever you're drawing. A scanner assures that it's going to be as close to the actual drawing as possible when you scan it in. Not only that, you can scan in at an insane resolution. So I don't just use it for scanning in sketches. I use it for scanning in really cool textures I find. Or like there was an old Xerox machine one time, and I just started making all these copies on it because it created all this artifact that looked awesome. Scanned them in, created texture set from it. So a lot of ways you can use a scanner. If you're not familiar with those, they're dirt cheap. Just go to Amazon and look for a scanner. A good one can cost $45. And I've had mine for about almost a decade now, so well worth the cost. But if you get hung up on drawing in analog, you can draw in digital. It's the same exact cognitive and creative benefit. It's going to guide your vector building efforts. I use drawing as a roadmap for vector building. My daughter works with me. She went to art school. She learned how to do vector art. But she's an obsessive drawer. She does all of her sketches, most of her illustration, not all of it, because she does work in vector. Most of her illustration is done on the iPad, not with any Adobe apps, though. She uses Clip Studio Pro and likes it, and it works really well. So I just wanted to cover that. Don't get hung up on which way you want to draw. Just choose the way that works best for you. I like analog. Not to say I don't draw in digital. I do. I have a Cintiq, Wacom, and I also draw digitally on my iPad using Fresco, and I push it to the desktop and finish it out in Illustrator. And I'll do a movie on that soon. But this is where I'll take my sketch and I'll go to the transparency palette. I usually set it for about 15%, and I just lock the layer just so I can't move it. And then I just start building my artwork on top of it. But what's going to help our building is make sure to establish that bounding box. So this bounding box is going to give us a reference point for building. All I'm doing here is just doing simple shape building using the pen tool. So all I want to do now is I want to go ahead and build out the rest of this shape here. So if I grab the pen tool, we'll start here. And we're just going to go ahead and pull this out. And this shape, if you think like a clock, I wrote a book about vector building called Vector Basic Training. And one of the chapters I call the clockwork method. Look at any shape. Circular shapes are given. Those are the easy ones. Put it at the tangents. The tangents would be 3 o'clock in this case. Pull it out. You don't have to pull the handles out all the way. Go back later and finesse them. Then you can go 12 o'clock. We go here to the 9 o'clock position like that. And then we can go down to here to 6 o'clock position. We might want to put 1 here like that. Then a 6 o'clock position like that. Once again, thinking of a clock, 9. And then this might be long enough to have a transition anchor point, but I'm going to try it without. So we'll go up here, and I'm going to go ahead and put it right there and pull this out. Now I just go back to the handles, and I just finesse the Bezier curves. By the way, named after Pierre Bezier, who was an engineer at Renault in Europe, and he didn't like the style of the bodies of the vehicles that Renault was doing, so he worked with Bezier curves and geometry to create more fluid-looking car designs like that. That's why nobody owns vector technology, and there's a bunch of companies that leverage it. They have their own proprietary tools and stuff, of course, but vector is an open source, and it's used within every industry that does any kind of fabrication, design, that kind of stuff. Like, it's been used in CAD drawing for years. That's why you can export out CAD drawings from Illustrator and give it to, an industrial designer or an engineer, and they'll be able to use it, and vice versa. So if you ever get it in the wrong location, or you think you can get a better location, by all means, I usually move it away so I can see it better, and I go ahead and adjust it. Now, in this case, what we're going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and select this, and I'm going to clone it, Command-C, Command-F. And I'm going to go ahead and clone the bounding box, select these two, and I'm going to shift it all the way up here. And you can see I didn't get it dead on where it meets up there. That's why I did this. So on this one, I would pull this that'll probably work. Now that I'm looking at it, I think I'm going to try something. I think this would look better if it's actually down there like that, which means I'm going to get rid of that one now, make a copy of this, Command-C, Command-F, select this bounding box. I'm going to move this back down here because I have to adjust this one like that. And now I'll adjust that. I just think this tangent looks better there than right on the edge. So what I usually do is I go into isolation mode. So I'll select these two, group it, double click into the group, select these, Command J to join them. You're kind of welding it together. Click out of the isolation group. And now on this one, I would probably just trim it with using the scissor tool right on the edge, right there. We don't need this now, just get rid of it. So that's how I do the basic, building of a pattern like this. Obviously, where it comes to these kind of free-floating elements, these you can start with just the elliptical tool. On these, I don't want them perfect, so I don't want it a perfect oval, so I'll just grab anchor points and move them just to make it a little more, I don't know the term, globular, whatever, or I'll distort it a little, just so they're not perfect elliptical shapes, because that's kind of boring. This, I'm trying to make it look, kind of what I had in mind is that nebulous looking kind of, I don't know, lava lamp type feel of shape. So that's all I'm going to do. Now, I'm not going to go through and build all that. I just wanted to explain that and show you that. When it's all said and done, we have all of our base vectors will look like this. And now on this shape, I connected it to the other one. So if I select this, you can see I have this all figured out. I took a copy of this, moved it over to create this shape here. But on this one, if I double click into this group, you can see this is just still a singular path. So this is where I'll go in and I'll make some edits. I'll just use the pen tool, and I just want to close this path. And I'll go down at the bottom and close that. Double click out of isolation mode. And if I select these shapes, all these shapes fall on top of the shape we just closed. So these, so you can see what I'm doing. And by the way, at this stage, I always work in magenta lines when I'm building shapes because I want to focus on shape and form. I have ideas in mind about color based off of what I'm working on. But at this point, I don't work in color. I just find it easier focusing on shape and form, especially if I'm using my sketch as a roadmap to build from. So I'll select these shapes. Since these are going to interact with the other one, we're just going to use Pathfinder to minus front. You know an engineer named these functions when they call it minus front. That just makes no sense. It's like when I used freehand for 15 years, they called it punch. So we're going to punch this through like that. So now we have a shape that looks just like this. So that's what we want. All the other shapes, so if I go ahead and Command A, deselect the bounding box, we don't want that, deselect the shape we just edited, all these other shapes, we'll go ahead and unite these. And if you go to your appearance palette, notice it's going to group when you unite like this. So what I usually do is I have a keyboard shortcut, F7, to turn it into a compound path, because sometimes if I want to make an edit on this group using a Pathfinder method, you might lose something. Something will just kind of randomly disappear at times. Not always, but many times it does. So I usually just turn this into a compound path. And I do that by hitting F7, which is a keyboard shortcut. We're going to take this bounding box now, make a copy of it, Command C, Command F, select all these shapes. We united, intersect them like that. And you can see we still have this one over here. So we would want to, I probably should have handled that a little differently, but it's no big deal. We'll just use the bounding box to register like that. And what am I doing here? Sorry about that. I kind of got lost there for a second. Let's do this. I think this will be easier. All we need is this bottom part, and we need to lop off this little thing hanging out over here. So what I'm going to do is, probably should have thought this through. This is the ugly part of the creative process, because I do the same thing even if I'm not trying to record a video in this case. So yeah, no big deal. So with this box, here's a throwaway shape for no other reason to edit an area shape. So I'll go ahead and lop that one off like that. And then I'll double click into isolation mode. We'll copy it. We'll paste in place, which is important. You don't want it to move. I'll make another copy of the bounding box using F3, Command C, Command F, select this, intersect it. Now we have all of our artwork the way it should be. The bounding box isn't even needed at this point, so we could even get rid of that. Ultimately, what you're going for is black and white art like this. And again, your bounding box is going to help you get there, but you really don't need it at this point. All we're going to do now is we're going to create some color here, because I do want to color this a specific color. And so what we're going to do, I want like a blue color here, and I'm working in CMYK, I should point out. If you prefer RGB, that's fine. I never work in RGB. I find it's easier to create within the limitations of CMYK. And then if something is only going to be used in RGB, then I can convert it and tweak colors if needed. But many times in RGB, if you work in RGB, it goes to print in a magazine or some kind of print publication. the color is going to look horrible. So I usually go CMYK to RGB all the time. We're just creating kind of I think this is too much red or blue, so I'm going to pull this down. I think that's good. So we're going to create a swatch. I'm going to add it to this group. One thing with swatches, always use global. It's always smart to do that, because if you make a change, you'll change anywhere in your design it's being used. And we also are going to need another color for this design. So let's go here. This one, I kind of want a lime type of green here. No red, lots of yellow. We'll add 100% and no black. So a lime color. We'll add that to this group as well. Turn that into global. And now we're going to, oh, I must have one already. Well, let's knock this down to like 98, or actually, I meant to type it in there. By the way, these names, Illustrator will automatically generate the break. And I usually don't name this like lime green. And the reason I don't name it that is because usually I have tooltips turned on. I kind of turn those off when I record a movie because they get in the way. But I'll go over and just hover over a swatch and it'll tell me what the color break is. So I usually just zero out the name if there's a name there. And then I go, okay. So if I click back into it, notice Illustrator will name it the color break you have if you don't have your own name in there. So now that we have these colors, we're going to compose our pattern. So I'm going to select this artwork, and this can be a compound path. This can be a group. Doesn't matter at this point. And all we're going to do is we're going to color this, this nice blue color. We're going to drag and drop it over here. And because we trimmed it already, if we go into the pattern tool, it's already perfectly composed and ready to use. All we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and just name it. So I'm going to go nebulous, and I always like to put the color that's associated with, because we're going to have several of these patterns composed onto one object to create the final pattern. So this will help me define what those assets are later if I ever want to come back and change something. I know what I'm working with. Go back to the desktop. So we have the blue. All we're going to do now is we're going to color this the green, but instead of leaving it in this orientation, I'm going to rotate it 180. Then I'm going to drag and drop it here. We'll double click into this, and we're just going to name this one too, nebulous, and we'll call this lime green, like that. And hit escape to get back to desktop. And now the last thing we're going to do is, I think I want it back in the original orientation, but I'm going to just color this white. We're going to drag and drop that over here. I think this is the one I just dropped in. Yeah. Okay. And we'll name it again. Once again, you can't see anything because it's white and it's on a white background, but it is there. We'll name it that. And it looks like I've used that name. So let's call it White 2. We'll be really original here. And go back to the desktop. Okay. Now we're going to reuse the appearance panel to compose our final pattern here. Let's go ahead and zoom out a little bit. Right now I have this kind of faded yellow in the background here. And I think we'll start with that just to leave that in place. And I'll go add another fill. And here I'm going to select the green, the lime green on top of it. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go ahead and do another fill. And this one is going to be this color here, the kind of blue color we had. But I'm going to go to opacity control, click on multiply, because I want this to multiply with the colors underneath it. So wherever it overlaps with another color, changes the value of that color, it changes the value of the blue as it goes over it. And I think that just looks far more immersive. Now, I think this one down below, this faded yellow, might be a little too much. So this is a case where I might just change this, maybe knock it down by 15%. So it's just a little lighter. I think that looks better. Like that. And now I'm going to add another fill. So right now we have 3 fills on one object. But the next one I'm going to do, I want to sandwich between the blue and the lime green. So we'll go ahead and add another one. And we're going to make this the white. Oops. I didn't make it white. I made it blue. I thought I selected white. But nope, that's right. That doesn't look that bad. But that's not the one I want. So let's make sure we get the right one here. And I'll select that. That's really kind of odd. Oh, I know what it's doing. It's using the exact same blue. Oh, I kind of threw myself off there for a second. See, this is normal. This is what you get in People in Process because this is what happens to me in real life. It threw me off. If I turn off the blue, the white will be there. It was just in the same position and it was throwing me off. I thought it was blue because when I turn on the blue, there's white underneath it, so it's no longer multiplied with the other colors behind it. So that's normal. So let's go ahead and turn off the blue. If you think of an appearance panel, it's like layers with magical abilities because you can put multiple attributes on one object like we're doing here. So I'm going to go ahead and select, you want to select this white pattern fill layer. And then all we're going to do is we're going to go over to rotate. With this layer selected now, we'll go to rotate. You want to make sure you turn off transform objects because you don't want the object the pattern's fill is in to move, just the pattern itself. And all we have to do is we can go to 45 type of degree angle like that, and you can see how it moves it. I think that's fine. We're going to click OK. We're going to go into opacity. I don't want this 100%. I want this a lot less than that. So we're going to knock off 30. We're going to go to 70. That way, as it overflows other areas, now if we turn on the blue, and actually, I think I'm going to rearrange this. So this is how layers work here. So we have the white one. I think I'm going to move that down below the green one. Oh, yeah, I like that a lot better. So this would be what I consider the final nebulous pattern. And once again, we can go to graphic styles. We can select this artwork that's on our artboard. We can drag it down and we can just place it into our graphic styles. That means we can use it later. Now, this particular pattern, I did other versions of it, other colorations of it, that is. You know, here's one, it's more coffee colored, and I scaled the overall pattern down. And that's one thing I should point out. We built it at this size, the pattern. That means as you apply it, it'll be the same size you build it. So if you want it to go smaller, all you have to do, let's go ahead and go to the blue. Let's say you wanted the blue aspect of this pattern smaller. Once again, you select that layer and just make sure you only have that layer selected. Then you can go to scale, open it up. You always want to make sure it click off transform object. That ensures that it's not going to, oh, you know what we didn't do? We have to make sure to have the object selected with this layer selected, then go to scale. Once again, make sure you have transform object off, otherwise it'll scale the object and you just want to scale the pattern. And then you can punch in any amount here. Let's try 85. You can preview it and you can see how it scales that. So that's how you control it. And doing that, actually, now that I look at this, I'm going to just click OK. I like that even better. So there's a lot of variations you can use within this. You could rotate them differently if you want. You can obviously color them differently. That's how I got this kind of coffee themed color. Here's another one where I simplified the colors just to 2. I think this is cool as well. This would be a cool lounge shirt, actually. And the way graphic styles works is if you just select any shape and you save yours as a graphic style, that means you can apply that style to any shape moving forward. If you put it in your library, you can share it with other users. It's a really great way to work. Now, if you've ever opened up just a new document inside of Illustrator, you might have seen some of my patterns before. So if you click on this, here's one of them. When Adobe first came out with the pattern tool with CS6, I did all the patterns. And if you look in the samples file that comes with Illustrator when you install it, you'll see a folder called Vonster Patterns. Those are all my patterns. Don't judge me too harshly. Some of them I still like. Some of them not so much because they kind of got monkeyed around with a little bit out of my control. But those were patterns I created for Adobe. Here's another pattern I created, and this one I'm actually going to be doing another movie on because this one was pretty complicated. And it's worth showing you how I built that. So be on the lookout for that. And I also created one based off of my love for all things tiki. And this pattern, I actually had fabric printed out, and I actually have a one-off custom tiki lounge shirt based off of this pattern. If you want to know more about creating your own custom repeat patterns, then check out my other two movies that I'm going to have on this channel, and you can see how to use the new repeat grid functionality in Illustrator, which I'll cover. I'll show the limitations of it as well. And I'm also going to do one on creating a more complex repeat pattern. The more you use the bounding box method, though, as I covered in this movie, and the pattern tool, you'll be able to create any type of custom repeat pattern you want. And the process will work with any version of Illustrator from CS6 or above as well. So I encourage you to adapt these methods into your creative workflow and discover a new realm of creative possibilities. If you'd like to learn more about using, once again, the repeat grid function, just make sure to check out my other movie on YouTube. If you like this movie, please consider sharing a link to my YouTube channel on social media. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you for watching. People Love Process. I hope this content helps you improve your own creative process.